Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's start. Vienna, 1853. The carriage wheels rattled over the cobblestones of the Ringstrasse, and Princess Catalina Bojovic clutched the velvet seat with trembling fingers. Through the small window, the sprawling magnificence of the Hofburg Palace loomed against the autumn sky, its pale stone facade gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Her stomach tightened with each passing moment. "Remember your training," her lady-in-waiting whispered in Serbian. Shoulders back, chin raised. Catalina nodded, adjusting the emerald brooch at her throat, the only remnant of her mother she had brought from Montenegro. At 22, she had expected to marry a minor nobleman from a neighboring principality, not to be summoned to the glittering heart of the Habsburg Empire as a potential bride for Emperor Leopold Yeselke. The Habsburg court had been seeking political alliances in the Balkans, and the Bojovic family's ancient lineage made Catalina a suitable, if unexpected, candidate. Her father, facing mounting debts and Russian pressure, had agreed with alarming speed. The carriage halted. A footman in imperial livery opened the door, and Catalina descended, her deep blue gown, hastily commissioned for the journey, rustling against the stone steps. The vastness of the palace courtyard made her feel impossibly small. Inside, the palace overwhelmed her senses. Gilded moldings, crystal chandeliers, and the hushed movements of countless servants. Every surface gleamed with power and wealth beyond anything in her homeland. The lady-in-waiting who had been assigned to her, Countess Maria Esterhazy, led her through a maze of corridors. "His Imperial Majesty may not receive you today," the Countess explained in precise French. "The Emperor is occupied with matters concerning the Crimean situation. You will be presented at court tomorrow evening." Catalina nodded, grateful for the reprieve. Her French was adequate, her German rudimentary. She had spent the 3-week journey frantically studying protocol from books her father's advisors had procured. The apartments assigned to her were grand beyond measure. A sitting room with silk-upholstered furniture, a bedchamber with a canopied bed, and windows overlooking the palace gardens. Yet as the doors closed behind her retinue, the silence was deafening. Catalina stood alone, a foreign princess in an empire that viewed her homeland as little more than a troublesome province. 3 floors above, Emperor Leopold Yeselke, 30 years old, 5 years on the throne, stared at the diplomatic correspondence on his desk. The report from his ambassador to St. Petersburg detailed Russian troop movements along the Danube. War was coming, despite his efforts at neutrality. "Your Majesty," his private secretary announced, "Chancellor Metternich requests an audience regarding the Montenegrin princess's arrival." Leopold nodded, rubbing his temples. The strategic marriage had been Metternich's idea, a way to strengthen Habsburg influence in the Balkans without military commitment. Leopold had agreed with political calculation, not personal interest. "Send him in." The aged chancellor entered, bowing with practiced precision despite his years. "Your Majesty, Princess Catalina has arrived. The court presentation is arranged for tomorrow evening." "What do we know of her?" Leopold asked, setting aside the Russian dispatch. "She is the eldest daughter of Prince Bojovic, 22 years old, educated at a convent in Trieste, speaks passable French and Italian. Her dowry is modest, but her bloodline is impeccable, descended from Byzantine nobility." Leopold nodded absently. "And her appearance?" "I am told she is acceptably handsome, Your Majesty. Not perhaps in the Viennese fashion, but dignified. She brings only a small retinue." "Very well. We shall see tomorrow." Leopold dismissed the chancellor with a wave. His first marriage, a love match to Duchess Eleonora of Saxony, had ended in her death during childbirth 3 years earlier. This time, he needed a politically advantageous union, nothing more. The morning brought Catalina her first true glimpse of Vienna. From her window, she watched the city awaken, merchants setting up stalls, carriages moving through the streets, the distant spire of St. Stephen's Cathedral piercing the mist. The Habsburg capital pulsed with life and commerce on a scale that made her homeland seem like a village by comparison. Her ladies helped her dress for a tour of the palace gardens, a simpler gown of sage green, though still finer than anything she had owned in Montenegro. As she walked the gravel paths between immaculately trimmed hedges, Catalina struggled to memorize the palace layout. knowing she would be judged on her ability to navigate court life. Rounding a corner, she came upon a small, secluded garden. An older gardener knelt among rose bushes, his weathered hands carefully pruning dead blooms. "Good morning," she said in her hesitant German. The man looked up, startled. "Good morning, my lady." He struggled to rise, but his knees seemed to give him trouble. Without thinking, Catalina moved forward and offered her arm for support. "Please, let me help you." The gardener looked shocked but accepted her assistance. "Thank you, my lady. Most kind. These roses are beautiful," she said, searching for the German words. "In my country, we have wild roses in the mountains, but not like these." The old man smiled, warming to her interest. "These are special to the imperial family. Empress Maria Theresa planted the first bushes herself." As they spoke, Catalina did not notice the tall figure watching from a balcony above, Emperor Leopold, who had risen early to review military reports and had stepped outside for fresh air. He observed with curiosity as the foreign princess helped the elderly gardener to a bench, then listened attentively as the man explained the different rose varieties. "That is the princess from Montenegro." Leopold asked his aide. "Yes, Your Majesty. Princess Catalina Bojovic." Leopold watched a moment longer. The Balkan princess was indeed handsome, dark-haired and graceful, but it was her unhesitating kindness to a servant that caught his attention. Such behavior would be considered inappropriate by many at court, yet there was something refreshing in its sincerity. "Interesting," he murmured, returning to his papers. That evening, Catalina faced her presentation at court with mounting anxiety. Her gown of deep crimson silk had been hastily altered by the palace seamstresses, who had worked through the night to ensure she would not embarrass herself, or, more importantly, the emperor. Her dark hair was arranged in the Viennese fashion, adorned with small diamonds borrowed from the imperial treasury. "Remember," Countess Esterhazy instructed, 3 steps forward, deep curtsy. Rise only when His Majesty addresses you. Keep your eyes lowered until then." Catalina nodded, rehearsing the German phrases she had memorized. The great ballroom of the Hofburg dazzled with hundreds of candles, the elite of the Habsburg Empire arranged in precise formation according to rank and favor. She felt the weight of their stares, curious, judgmental, speculative, as she was announced. "Her Serene Highness, Princess Catalina Bojovic of Montenegro." The vast room fell silent. Catalina moved forward, counting her steps, feeling as though she were walking to her execution rather than a diplomatic introduction. She sank into the deep curtsy she had practiced for hours, her gown pooling around her like spilled wine. "You may rise, princess." The voice was deeper than she expected, with a clarity that carried authority without needing to assert it. Catalina rose, finally lifting her eyes to Emperor Leopold. He was taller than reports had suggested, with broad shoulders emphasized by his white military uniform adorned with gold braid and medals. His face was handsome in a severe way, strong jaw, straight nose, and eyes the color of steel. A neatly trimmed beard framed features that revealed little emotion. "We welcome you to Vienna," he said formally. "We trust your journey was comfortable." "Your Imperial Majesty is most gracious," Catalina replied in her carefully practiced German. Vienna's beauty exceeds all tales told of it. Something flickered in Leopold's eyes, recognition. "I believe we have a mutual acquaintance," he said, lowering his voice slightly. "Herr Schmidt, who tends the East Garden roses." Catalina couldn't hide her surprise. "The gardener?" "Yes, Your Majesty. He was kind enough to teach me about the imperial roses this morning." "He has served 3 emperors with equal devotion," Leopold replied. "He tells me you have a gentle touch with plants." "In Montenegro, we must nurture what little grows in our rocky soil, Your Majesty." The exchange lasted only moments, but Catalina felt the court's attention sharpen. Leopold nodded and moved on to the next presentation, but something had shifted. The emperor had noticed her, had spoken beyond mere formality. The following days established a rhythm to palace life. Catalina's mornings were filled with language lessons and protocol instruction. Afternoons were devoted to carefully orchestrated accidental encounters with the emperor, walks through galleries where Leopold might pass, musical performances he was known to attend. 1 week after her arrival, Catalina slipped away from her ladies during an afternoon concert. The music was beautiful, But the whispers behind fans about her homeland, her modest dowry, her unsophisticated manners, had become unbearable. She found herself again in the small rose garden, now empty in the late afternoon light. She sat on the stone bench, breathing the autumn air, when a voice spoke behind her. "You prefer gardens to Schubert, Princess?" Catalina rose hurriedly, curtsying as Emperor Leopold approached. He wore a simpler uniform today, without the weight of ceremonial decorations. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. The music is beautiful, but I needed air," he finished for her. "As did I." An awkward silence fell between them. Leopold gestured to the bench. "May I join you? Without the formality of court, just for a moment?" Catalina nodded, speechless at this unprecedented informality. The Emperor of Austria did not sit casually with foreign princesses. "Tell me of Montenegro," he said as they sat, a careful distance between them. "Not the diplomatic reports or the strategic assessments. Tell me of the land itself." Something in his tone, a genuine curiosity, emboldened her. "It is wild, Your Majesty. Mountains that touch the sky, forests where wolves still run free. The villages cling to valleys like birds' nests. We are a poor country in gold, but rich in courage and tradition." Leopold listened, his expression softening slightly. "You miss it." "Every day," she admitted, then caught herself. "But Vienna is magnificent. I am honored to be here." "Honor is a poor substitute for home," Leopold said quietly. "I know this. Even emperors are homesick sometimes." Catalina looked at him with new eyes. In that moment, she saw beyond the imperial facade to the man beneath, one who carried the weight of an empire on his shoulders. "What do you miss most?" she asked, forgetting protocol in her genuine interest. A flicker of surprise crossed his face at her directness. "Freedom," he said after a moment. "The ability to ride alone through the countryside, to speak without every word being analyzed for policy implications." He shook his head. "Forgive me. That was inappropriately personal." "No," Catalina said softly. "It was honest." Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, they were simply a man and woman sharing confidences in a garden. Then Leopold stood, resuming his imperial bearing. "The concert will be ending. Your absence will be noted." He offered his arm, an extraordinary gesture. "Allow me to escort you back." Catalina placed her hand lightly on his sleeve, feeling the fine wool beneath her fingers. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Their return caused a sensation. The emperor himself escorting the Montenegrin princess created immediate speculation. Catalina felt the stares of the court ladies as Leopold led her to her seat, bowed formally, and departed. Countess Esterhazy leaned close. "What happened?" "We talked of gardens," Catalina replied truthfully, though she knew it was far more significant than that. They had shared a moment of humanity in a world governed by policy and power. That night, a small package arrived at Catalina's apartments, a book of botanical illustrations, with a simple note, "For educational purposes." The gesture was small, but in the rigid protocol of the Habsburg court, it spoke volumes. Leopold had thought of her beyond their official interactions. October turned to November, and Catalina's position at court gradually transformed. The initial curiosity about the foreign princess evolved into grudging acceptance, particularly as the emperor's interest became more evident. Twice weekly, they would walk in the imperial gardens, discussing everything from literature to the management of mountain forests. Leopold discovered in Catalina something rare at his court, a person who spoke to him as a human being rather than an institution. "My advisors insist I should focus our meeting today on the question of Balkan railways," Leopold said one crisp morning as they walked along a frost-covered path. "They have prepared extensive briefing documents." Catalina smiled. "And what does the emperor wish to discuss instead?" "The emperor," he said with a rare smile, "would like to know if the princess has read the Byron poem he recommended last week." "She has," Catalina replied, falling into the third-person formality that had become a private joke between them. Though she found his portrayal of the Balkans romanticized beyond recognition. Leopold laughed, a sound so uncommon that a nearby guard glanced over in surprise. "The princess has a most refreshing honesty." Their walks became the subject of court gossip. The Imperial Council, seeing the emperor's interest, began to accelerate marriage negotiations. What had begun as a strategic consideration was now a diplomatic priority. Yet obstacles remained. The religious differences between Catholic Austria and Orthodox Montenegro required delicate negotiation. Catalina would need to convert, abandoning the faith of her ancestors. More troubling were the whispers about her unsuitability, her modest background, her direct manner, her lack of sophisticated training. Count Maximilian Adler, Leopold's childhood friend and trusted advisor, voiced these concerns one evening as they reviewed military reports. "She is charming, Leopold, but is she truly Empress material? The court expects a certain polish." Leopold set down his pen. "The court expects whatever I tell them to expect, Max. Of course, but there are practical considerations. Her dowry is negligible. Montenegro offers limited strategic advantage. And there are other candidates, Bavarian princesses, Saxon duchesses, with stronger claims." "I am aware of the alternatives," Leopold said coolly. "Then you must also be aware of the rumors," Adler pressed. "That your interest stems from sentimental reasons rather than imperial necessity." Leopold's expression hardened. "Choose your next words carefully, old friend." Adler sighed. "There are whispers that she reminds you of Eleonora. The same directness, the same unpretentious manner. That grief, not strategy, guides your thinking." A painful silence filled the room. Leopold's first wife had been his choice, against his father's wishes. Her death had nearly broken him. "Leave me," Leopold said quietly. Alone, the emperor stood at the window, looking out at the city lights. Adler's words had struck closer to truth than he cared to admit. There was something in Catalina that echoed Eleonora's spirit, not in appearance or background, but in the essential quality of seeing him as a man first, emperor second. The following day, formal invitations were issued for a winter ball to celebrate the feast of Saint Leopold, the emperor's name day. Such celebrations were tradition, but this year's event carried special significance. Court gossip suggested an announcement would be made. Catalina received her invitation with trepidation. Her friendship with Leopold had deepened over the weeks, but he had made no formal declaration of intent. Their conversations, though increasingly personal, maintained careful boundaries. "The gown must be perfect," Countess Esterhazy declared, summoning the finest dressmakers in Vienna. "This ball will determine your future." The night of the ball arrived with a light snowfall that dusted Vienna like powdered sugar. The Hofburg blazed with light, carriages lined the approaches, and the nobility of the empire arrived in their finest regalia. Catalina stood before her mirror, hardly recognizing herself. Her gown was a masterpiece of silver tissue over pale blue silk, embroidered with crystal beads that caught the light with every movement. Her dark hair was adorned with diamond stars from the imperial collection, a significant honor granted by Leopold himself. "You look like an empress," her lady-in-waiting whispered. "I look like someone I don't recognize," Catalina replied honestly. The great ballroom exceeded even its usual splendor. Thousands of candles illuminated the space, reflecting off gold leaf and crystal. The imperial orchestra played Strauss waltzes as couples moved across the polished floor. Catalina entered with her small retinue, feeling the immediate shift in attention. Ladies assessed her gown with expert eyes. Gentlemen bowed with calculated deference. She was no longer simply the foreign princess, but a woman who might become their empress. Emperor Leopold stood at the far end of the ballroom, surrounded by ministers and foreign dignitaries. Their eyes met across the crowded space, and he inclined his head slightly, a private acknowledgement. The formalities proceeded: presentations, speeches, toasts to the emperor's health. Throughout, Catalina maintained the composure she had practiced relentlessly, though her heart raced beneath the structured bodice of her gown. Finally, Leopold approached her, the crowd parting before him. "Princess Catalina," he said formally, "would you honor me with this dance?" The orchestra struck up a waltz, the emperor's waltz, composed for this very occasion. Leopold led her to the center of the floor, one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers. The touch, even through gloves, sent warmth through her fingers. "You dance beautifully," he said as they began to move. "I have practiced every day for weeks," she admitted. "I was determined not to embarrass you." Something softened in his expression. "You could never embarrass me, Catalina." It was the first time he had used her name without her title, a significant breach of protocol, and yet more intimate than any formal declaration could be. As they turned about the floor, other couples joined them, but it seemed to Catalina that they moved in a world apart. Leopold's hand at her waist was steady, guiding her through the complex patterns of the Viennese waltz. "Everyone is watching us," she whispered. "Let them watch," he replied. "For once, I find I don't care what they think." The music swelled, and Leopold drew her a fraction closer, not enough to cause scandal, but enough that she could feel the strength in his frame, smell the subtle cedar scent of his cologne. "I have something to ask you," he said quietly. "Not here, not now. Will you meet me in the Winter Garden at midnight?" Catalina's heart skipped. Such a meeting would be improper, potentially scandalous. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. The dance ended, and Leopold bowed formally before escorting her back to her ladies. For the next hours, Catalina moved through the ball in a haze, accepting compliments and making conversation while her thoughts remained fixed on the midnight appointment. At 11:45, she slipped away from the ballroom, murmuring excuses about needing fresh air. The Winter Garden, a vast greenhouse filled with exotic plants, was lit only by moonlight filtering through the glass ceiling. Palms and ferns cast elaborate shadows across the tiled floor. Leopold was already there, standing beside a fountain where water trickled over marble shells. He had removed his ceremonial sash and medals, appearing almost ordinary in their absence. "You came," he said simply. "Did you doubt I would?" "No." He smiled. "Your courage has never been in question." Catalina moved closer, drawn by the unusual vulnerability in his expression. "Why did you ask me here, Leopold?" The use of his name without title hung between them, an intimacy she had never before permitted herself. "Because what I wish to say cannot be said in the language of courts and diplomacy." He took her hands in his. "These past weeks, you have shown me kindness without agenda, honesty without calculation. You have seen me as a man, not a crown." Catalina's breath caught. "Is that so rare?" "Rarer than you can imagine." He squeezed her hands gently. "My advisors speak of alliances, of strategic marriages, of dynastic considerations. They say I should choose based on political advantage alone." Her heart sank. "And they are right. You are an emperor. Your marriage must serve the empire." "Yes," he agreed. "But an emperor is also a man who has known grief, who understands the difference between duty and happiness." He released one of her hands to touch her cheek gently. "I did not expect you, Catalina. I did not expect to find in a foreign princess from a small mountain kingdom the qualities I most value: kindness, wisdom, authenticity." Catalina leaned slightly into his touch. "What are you saying, Leopold?" "I am saying that tomorrow, I will formally ask for your hand in marriage. There will be negotiations, treaties, religious accommodations. The court will wrap our lives in protocol and policy." His voice softened. "But tonight, I am asking if you could love me. Not the emperor, but the man." Tears welled in Catalina's eyes. "I already do." Leopold drew her gently into his arms, and their lips met in a kiss that defied imperial protocol, tender, genuine, unhurried. When they finally parted, Catalina saw in his eyes the same wonder she felt. "I should return you to the ball," he said reluctantly, "before your absence causes speculation." "Too late for that," she smiled. "But yes, we should go back." They walked together through the moonlit garden, hands clasped until they reached the door that would return them to the world of court and empire. There, Leopold raised her hand to his lips. "Tomorrow begins the formal process," he said. "It will be arduous and public. But remember this moment, Catalina. Remember that beneath the ceremonies and negotiations lies this truth between us." The following morning, the imperial court buzzed with anticipation as Leopold summoned his council. The announcement was brief but definitive. Emperor Leopold Yeselke would wed Princess Catalina Bojovic of Montenegro. Diplomatic dispatches raced across Europe, carrying news that would reshape alliances and redraw political calculations. The engagement period was set for 6 months, time needed for Catalina's religious instruction, for diplomatic treaties to be drafted, and for the empire to prepare for a new empress. Catalina faced these months with determination, studying Catholicism with genuine interest while privately maintaining her Orthodox prayers. She immersed herself in imperial history and Habsburg traditions, absorbing languages and protocols with fierce concentration. Leopold watched her transformation with admiration and occasional concern. Do not lose yourself in becoming what they expect, he told her during one of their now-sanctioned garden walks. It is your difference that I value, not your conformity. I am still myself, she assured him. But I must learn to be an empress as well. Their wedding in May 1854 united the ancient Habsburg Empire with the proud mountain kingdom of Montenegro. St. Stephen's Cathedral was transformed with flowers from both nations. The ceremony conducted in Latin with prayers in German and Serbian. Catalina wore a gown of silver and white, her veil held by a diamond tiara that had adorned Habsburg brides for centuries. As they spoke their vows, Leopold broke slightly with tradition, adding a personal promise in a voice meant only for her. I take you not for empire, but for love. The years that followed tested that promise. The Crimean War drew Austria into dangerous diplomatic waters. Court factions questioned the empress's influence, particularly when she advocated for greater recognition of Slavic peoples within the empire. Catalina faced criticism for everything from her accent to her preference for simpler court ceremonies. Yet through it all, she maintained the essential quality that had first drawn Leopold to her, a genuine kindness that extended to all, regardless of rank. She established hospitals for wounded soldiers, founded schools for girls, and insisted on improving conditions for the servants at court. You cannot save everyone, Leopold cautioned when she returned exhausted from visiting a veterans' hospital. No, she agreed, but I can try to save some. And I can teach our children that an empress's duty extends beyond wearing a crown. Their first child, a daughter, arrived in the winter of 1855, followed by a son 2 years later. Catalina insisted on nursing them herself, scandalizing the court but delighting her husband, who would often find her in the nursery, singing Montenegrin lullabies to their children. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Leopold surprised Catalina with a gift, the deed to a small hunting lodge in the foothills of the Alps. It is not Montenegro, he said as they stood on the terrace, looking at mountains that echoed her homeland. But perhaps it can be our sanctuary from court life. A place where we are simply Leopold and Catalina, not emperor and empress. Catalina embraced him, her heart full. You remembered that first day in the garden, when you spoke of missing mountains? He smiled. I remember everything you've ever told me. As decades passed, the Habsburg Empire faced revolutions, wars, and the inexorable rise of nationalism that would eventually transform Europe. Through it all, the imperial couple remained united, their private devotion a constant amid political turmoil. Courtiers who had once whispered about the foreign princess came to speak with respect of Empress Catalina, whose kindness had indeed conquered more than an emperor's heart. It had won the loyalty of a people, the admiration of her children, and a place in history not merely as a consort, but as a woman who brought humanity to an imperial throne. In their later years, as Leopold's health began to fail, they spent more time at their Alpine retreat. There, away from the demands of state, they would sit together on the terrace, watching the mountains change with the seasons. Do you ever regret it? Leopold asked her once, as they watched the sunset paint the peaks gold and rose. Leaving your homeland for this complicated empire of ours. Catalina took his hand, the same gesture of genuine affection she had shown for nearly 30 years. Never. Home isn't a place, Leopold. It's where love resides. And in that simple truth lay the essence of their story. How a foreign princess had conquered an emperor's heart with nothing more complicated, yet infinitely rare, than kindness.